Bees are said to be Allah's miracles. The way they function and how they behave are to be held as an example. In the Islamic holy book, the Quran, a chapter is dedicated to the bee, called An-Nahl. This literally translates to the bee, and it describes the bee's way of life, and how Muslims should be more like them. Surah Al-Nahl, chapter 16, 68-69, talks about a variety of topics, but Allah specifically chose the title, the bee, to catch the attention of the readers. Bees are said to be Allah's miracles. The way they function and how they behave are to be held as an example. The significance of Al-Nahl as chapter 16 is important. The only verse in this chapter that mentions bees is made up of 16 words and 16 different Arabic letters. Coincidentally, female bees have 16 pairs of chromosomes, whereas males have 16 chromosomes. What is fascinating about the bees in the Quran is that it was written from a scientific standpoint, where the colony, roles and practices of bees are observed. These characteristics and traits were used as a figure of speech for the follower reading the Quran. A reason why an entire chapter in the Quran has been devoted to the bee is that Allah has enabled the honey bee to produce a substance within which there is a cure for all mankind. Honey. In Surah Al-Nahl, Allah asks people to give thought to the attributes of the bees and embody these traits in their lives. Through their behavior, we learn things such as to gain knowledge and reflect, to care for our community and maintain good relations. In the scientific language, all the honeybees belong to the genus Apis. The honeybee communicates with other honeybee using a dance language, which scientists have discovered to be very complicated and highly developed. Approximately a third of all the food we eat is due to pollination from the honeybee. Unfortunately, due to habitat loss, pollution, pesticides and disease, their numbers have dwindled. Over the last decade, there has been a rise in colony collapse disorder. Scientists say, if bees disappeared from the surface of the earth, humans would have 4 years left to live. The bee has officially been declared the most important animal on earth by the Earthwatch Institute in 2017. Surah An-Nahl, 16. Pages from an early Ottoman Quran written in 2 different script styles. 16th century. The right-hand page starts with part of verse 110 from Surah An-Nahl, the bee, and continues through to verse 122 on the left-hand page. Allah mentioned in Quran, "And thy Lord taught the bee to build its cells and hills on trees and men's habitation, then to eat of all the produce of the earth, and find with skill the spacious paths of its Lord." Al-Quran chapter 16 verses 68-69. Von Frisch received the Nobel Prize in 1973 for his research on the behavior and communication of bees. The bee, after discovering any new garden or flower, goes back and tells its fellow bees the exact direction and map to get there, which is known as bee dance. The meanings of this insect's movements that are intended to transmit information between worker bees have been discovered scientifically using photography and other methods. The Quran mentions in the above verse how the bee finds with skill the spacious paths of its Lord. The worker bee or the soldier bee is actually a female bee. In Surah Al-Nahl chapter number 16, verses 68-69, the gender used for the bee is the female gender, pasluki, and coolly indicating that the bee that leaves at home for gathering food is a female bee. In other words, the soldier or worker bee is a female bee. In fact, in Shakespeare's play, Henry IV, some of the characters speak about bees and mention that the bees are soldiers and that they have a king. That is what people thought in Shakespearean times. They thought that the worker bees are male bees and that they go home and are answerable to a king bee. This, however, is not true. The worker bees are females and they do not report to a king bee but to the queen bee. But it took modern investigations and the last 300 years to discover this. But the Quran said about this about 1,400 years ago. That time there was no technology or any scientific resources. Who could have mentioned that many years ago except the Creator Allah? This beautiful hadith, narrated by Imam Ahmad, states that, the Messenger of Allah said, "By the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, the believer is like a bee, which eats that which is pure and wholesome and lays that which is pure and wholesome." When it lands on something it does not break or ruin it. Isn't that beautiful?